and I'm the bilingual education coordinator at Support for Families. Flavia is also my coworker. She's another bilingual education coordinator. If this is your first time here, our agency is based in San Francisco and for more than 30 years has provided support for families with children with disabilities of all ages. In our agency, more than 50% of the team are professionals and parents of children with disabilities or special care needs. In our organization, we provide information, education, support, resources, and referral. We have support groups for parents. We have one-on-one support through our family resource specialist. We have a peer-to-peer parent mentor program, and we offer ongoing workshops and trainings, such as tonight's presentation for caregivers, and also the professionals who support them. During the presentation, you will find a link in the chat to evaluate this workshop. This short feedback helps us to improve our programming and also keep our programming free for all. Evaluations are a way for our funders to measure the impact of our work. So please take a moment to fill it out before you leave the sessions. And this full presentation will be shared to all of you afterwards. Thank you. So I pass to Raymond.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I think there's someone asking about the Chinese interpretation in the chat.
Thank you, Raymond. Jojo, if you can take it, thank you so much.
Yes, we 我哋有中文翻譯嘅。Donna 可唔可以再介紹下中文翻譯？你有個地球儀喺下低你個 Zoom 嗰度有個 interpretation 有個地球儀咧，你撳嗰個掣咧，你就可以入嘅翻譯頻道噶啦。
Okay, hopefully everyone's in the language channel they need. Once again, my name is Raymond Kwong. I am an advocate with Disability Rights California. So today I have with me Leilani Pfeiffer. She and I will be in the background putting information in the chat, sharing the PowerPoint, making sure everything runs correctly, and we support Maria, our presenter, one of our senior attorneys at Disability Rights California. So before we get started, I'm going to give a quick overview of who we are. So we are a statewide nonprofit agency, and we provide free legal services to people with disability with any disability-related issues. So we have offices statewide, with our headquarters being in Sacramento. We have office in Oakland, Fresno, Los Angeles, Ontario, San Diego, and other smaller offices in between. We have attorneys and advocates who can handle a variety of issues, from access or discrimination with housing, with transportation, with education, which includes special education and higher education. We can also help with public health benefits such as Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, Social Security overpayment issue that relates to employment. And we have within our agency separate teams, such as the Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. You might be familiar. They specifically help clients of the regional center, and our client assistant program. They specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehab. So for those folks who are joining in now and might have missed this in the beginning, this presentation is being recorded. And the recordings, along with the materials and any information you see in the chat, will be shared to you after the presentation. Keep in mind, if you decide to put questions in the chat, don't put any personal information. We're trying to protect your privacy. We don't want it shared with along with the recording. There will be time for question and answers afterwards, with the recordings being paused or stopped, so you can ask without your privacy being shared out. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our senior attorney, Maria Uriarte.
Thank you, Raymond. So we're going to go ahead and put the PowerPoints up. We have an English and Spanish PowerPoint side by side. So today we're going to talk about the regional center system. It's an overview, very basic information. I want to let you know that on our website, we have publications. If you go to the publication section of our website, we have publications with regard to the regional center, and we also have a manual called the Rights Under the Lanterman Act Manual. I would, if I ever had a question about regional center services, everligibility, whatever, that's where I would go to first, because there's a lot of information. It's in every chapter is in a question and answer format, and the answer includes maybe the statute that says what the answer is saying, the regulation, maybe there's case law. So there's a lot of good information. It's a good starting point for all of you with regard to the regional center system. So next slide. So why do we call it the Lanterman Act? Because one of the politicians who promoted regional centers in the state of California, his last name was Lanterman. So we call it the Lanterman Act. And the Lanterman Act is a set of codes. And these sets of codes are found in the Welfare and Institutions Codes. So we call it the WIC. So these set of laws or codes or statutes, it's all synonymous, are found in sections 4400 through 4906. There's a link to the Lanterman Act and to these codes. And then there's also a link to supplemental codes. Now, then we have, not only do we have the law, we also have regulations. And what the regulations do is that they're like rules that implement the law. So they go hand in hand with the law. And the regulations with regard to the Lanterman Act are found in the California Code of Regulations, Title 17. And there's a link there for the regulations. Now, why am I giving you all of this? Because if you're a consumer of the regional center, you're going to be, most likely, you will be a consumer of the regional center for your entire life. And you need to know about because if the regional center tells you something about a subject, you'll know where to go. You'll be able to find out if the regional center is telling you the correct information. You can go to the code section. You can go to the regulations. You could go to our Lanterman Act, the Rights Under the Lanterman Act manual. You could reach out to Support for Families. You could reach out to us if you have any questions. You can reach out to our sister organization, the Office of Client Rights Advocates. But this is a lifelong thing, and you really need to know the program in order to get the most that you can from the regional center. Next slide. So why the Lanterman Act? It's to give people with developmental disabilities the rights to support and services that will allow them to live more normal and independent lives. And that's what WIC section 4501 says, right? To approximate the life that we without disabilities lead, right? Why not? That's what the law says. Next slide. So some of the players involved we're talking about the Department of Developmental Services. It's the state agency that oversees the entire regional center system. And there's information, there's the link to DDS, and there are DDS directives. These are letters, directives that are sent to all the regional centers with regard to topics. Really important to look at those directives because it's telling the regional centers, this is the way that this has to happen. This is so sometimes it clarifies things for all the regional centers. We have 21 regional centers in the state of California. You can look it up using the link. We also have the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. The link is there. They provide supports for people with developmental disabilities. Next slide. So let's talk about eligibility for regional center services. So you have to have a developmental disability. The disability had to have existed before age 18. The developmental disability has to be substantial, and it can't be solely a physical disability, solely a psychiatric disability. It has to be a developmental disability. So let's dive deeper into all of this. We'll go to the next slide. What are the developmental disabilities that they're talking about? It's either going to be cerebral palsy, an intellectual disability, epilepsy, autism, or what they call fifth category. That's a category that's closely related to the intellectual disability category and requires similar treatment. So these are the categories. These are what are considered developmental disabilities. Note, there are no mental health disabilities. Note, there are no physical disabilities that are included in what is a developmental disability that will get you regional center eligibility. Next slide. Not only do you have to have at least one of those developmental disabilities, it has to be substantial, right? What does it mean? It means that you have to have significant functional limitations in 3 or more of the major life activities. And what are those major life activities? In self-care, receptive and expressive language, mobility, self-direction, learning, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. So sometimes when people are applying for regional center services, they think that just because they have a diagnosis of autism, that should make them regional center clients, but that's not the whole picture. The disability, that developmental disability has to be substantial, and this is what it means to be substantial. Next slide. Again, if you have a physical disability, if you have a psychiatric disability, if you have a learning disability, you're not going to be a regional center client. This is not the developmental disability that will help you get eligibility. Next slide. So what do you do when you want to become a regional center client? You call the regional center client in your area, the regional center in your area. And once and you say you want to apply for regional center services, there's an intake meeting that happens within the next 15 days. And that's called the initial meeting. And after that initial meeting, the regional center has 120 days to make a decision with regard to eligibility. But there are situations where it could be less than 120 days. It could be 60 days if the person's health is at risk, if the delay would risk further delay in mental or physical development, or if there's imminent risk of placement in a more restrictive setting. What does that mean? That if, that this person is at risk of being taken out of the house and put into some form of institution, a more restrictive setting. So there are exceptions to the 120 days. Next slide. Wanted to talk briefly about early start intervention. Next slide. So early start program is for children 0 to 3 years old. And early start is administered through the regional center. Just because you're an early start doesn't mean you're a regional center client, because regional center eligibility typically starts at age 3. Sometimes if the child is under the age of 3, the regional center will know based on the disability that this child will qualify for regional center services when the child turns 3. And so some children are found eligible for regional center services prior to the age of 3. But being an early start is not, you're not a regional center client. You're just in the, you're in the early start your child is in the early start program administered by the regional center. So the early start program is for children who there might be some concern about the development of the child. And so these children are provided services and supports early on, right, to help in those early years. And both the regional centers and the local school districts are involved with the early start program. Next slide. So when your child is still not 3 years old, the regional center has to complete an assessment to determine whether your child will qualify for to become a regional center client. Remember, you have to have a substantial developmental disability. And it's possible that after the regional center completes an assessment, the regional center will say to the parent, well, your child is not eligible for regional center services. And you have two options there. You have the option of agreeing and not doing anything about it, or you have the option of appealing. If you're not quite sure that what the regional center is telling you is correct, you should reach out to Support for Families, reach out to us, reach out to OCRA and discuss the case. There's also something called provisional eligibility that allows a child to continue receiving services through the regional center up to the age of 5. And we're gonna put a link to a document that shows the difference in eligibility for regional center services and provisional eligibility for regional center services. So there are kind of two things going on here. Remember, when you apply for eligibility, when you want to become, be a member of the regional center, for example, and you're denied eligibility, you must get something in writing. It's a notice that says that you're denied eligibility, the reasons why you're denied eligibility, and the law that the regional center is relying on for denial of eligibility, and also your right to appeal. Really important that you know that. If you get a verbal denial and you never receive a written denial, you can still appeal. I've spoken to parents who were told, for example, 6 months ago that the child wasn't going to get a service, and they were still waiting for the notice. And I said, well, no, the regional center, excuse me, has the obligation of giving you a written notice when they're denying eligibility or denying a service or reducing a service. But if they've not given you that notice, you can still appeal, and also indicate in your appeal that you didn't get a notice. Next slide. So those are, if you're interested in provisional eligibility, this is for children who are aging out of early start. Excuse me. And This provisional eligibility will allow the child to continue to receive services from the regional center up to the age of 5. And it's a relatively new provision. So, and we've been getting calls from parents whose child, they were denied regional center eligibility, but they were also denied provisional eligibility. 2 different things. And there's information there for you to look at. Next slide. So let's talk about regional center services generally. So let's go to the next slide. So the law says that services are supposed to approximate the pattern of everyday living available to people without disabilities of the same age. So consumers, when we say consumers, we're talking about people who are eligible for regional center services, can ask for services and supports that will lessen the effect of the developmental disability, allow them to have a more independent, productive, and normal life, and learn new skills. This is what the law says. So when you're talking to the service coordinator about services, you want to have this information handy. They may say, well, why do you want this service? Well, it's going to allow the consumer to live more independently, more productive, a more normal life. It'll allow the consumer to learn new skills or lessen the effects of the developmental disability. Really important information. Next slide. Things to remember when you're trying to ask for services. Establish the need for the service. Sometimes people are too concerned about what is the name of the service. What is the name of, what is there a list of services, like a whole list of services that the regional center is supposed to provide? No, it doesn't exist. But the law, the code section does. There's a section in the Lanterman Act that says that services include but are not limited. And it goes on to list more than 30 services. And those are just examples of the kinds of services that the regional center can provide. But more important than knowing or trying to figure out what the name of the service is establish the need for the service. And it's important to show that the need is related to your developmental disability. Also important to show that there's no generic resource for the service that you're asking for or natural supports. And I'm going to explain what generic resource is and natural support. Establish the need. The need is related to your developmental disabilities. No, there's no generic resource. No, there's no natural support. This is probably one of the most important slides in this presentation. Next slide. So, the law says that the regional center has to investigate and create and be creative and innovative to meet the consumer's needs. I hear a lot about, that the service coordinator is just offering this service and that service, but that's not what the law says. The law says that, the regional center should step out of the box and be innovative. Think about, if it's not a service that's being offered, but it's needed, then, be innovative and creative about the service. And the regional center is also responsible to make sure that all of the needed services are being provided. That's also really important. I know sometimes we hear, oh, but the regional center is saying that there are no vendors. Well, that's not an excuse, and we're going to talk about that a little later. Next slide. So some of the categories of services if you look at remember I gave you the link to the Lanterman Act. You go to Welfare and Institutions Code section 4512B. That's where it talks about, it gives you a list of services, and it's really important because it says, including but not limited to all of these services, right? There is no exhaustive list of services. But the Welfare and Institutions Code 4512 gives you examples of the kinds of services the regional center can provide. And as you see here, there are lots of different services that can be provided through the regional center. These are just examples. It's not the only services that the regional center can provide. Next slide. When you're talking about a service, you also have to look at the purchase of service policies that your regional center has. Every regional center has their own purchase of service policies. It's on the website. Sometimes it's really hard to find. Sometimes these purchase of service policies are buried somewhere, and it takes a while to find them, but they're all there. And they are guidelines for purchasing certain services. One of the common services that you'll find in purchase of service policies is respite. So if you're wanting to ask for respite, you should look at the regional center's purchase of service policies to see if respite is included. And what the purchase of service policy does is it gives the criteria for getting the service and the limits for getting the service. It describes the service. So, one of the things you should do when you're thinking about services and look at specific services is to look at the purchase of service guidelines for your regional center to see if there's anything in the purchase of service guidelines regarding the service that you're asking for. So we included a link to ELARC's purchase of service guidelines. It's very easy to find on their website so that you can have an idea of what it looks like. Purchase of service policies can differ from regional center to regional center. I know it seems unfair. I think it's unfair, but that's what happens. And one thing that you need to take away from purchase of service discussion here is that there are always exceptions to the purchase of service policies. So even though, for example, there may be something in the purchase of service policies as the criteria for getting it, there's always an exception to the purchase of service guidelines. So that's important to know. The other thing to know is that the law says that the regional center cannot provide services that other agencies can provide. So these other agencies are considered generic resources, right? So, for example, if I go to if I am a consumer of the regional center and I need a power wheelchair and I have Medi-Cal or I have private insurance or I have CCS perhaps, and I go, and the first thing I do is I go to the regional center service coordinator and I say, service coordinator, I want you to get me a power wheelchair. Well, the regional center service coordinator is going to say to me, Maria, you have to exhaust your generic resources for that power wheelchair. You have Medi-Cal, you have private insurance, you have CCS. So before you come to us to ask us for that, you have to go and ask it from Medi-Cal, from your private insurance, from CCS, and you need to bring those denials to us before we can consider paying for a power wheelchair for you. So regional centers considered payer of last resort, right? And other generic resources could be in-home supported services, could be, it could be the Department of Rehabilitation. Maybe what you're asking the regional center for is something that in your Department of Rehab client, something that the Department of Rehab should be paying for and not the regional center. School district are also can be considered generic resources. So if you're going to ask for a service and it's a service that where there's a generic resource that could pay for it, what you want to do is exhaust that generic resource, right? Before you go to your service coordinator. Next slide. However, the law also says that there should not be any gaps in the IPP services that are being provided. So if I need a service that's in my IPP, but there's a generic resource, and it's going to take a long while to get an answer from my generic resource, or my generic resource denies the service, and I'm told by the regional center, but you haven't really exhausted your generic resource because you need to appeal. But if I need that service while I'm trying to get it from my generic resource or appealing it, if that's what the regional center is requiring that I do, then the regional center should provide that service as a gap, under gap funding. So should provide that service while I'm trying to get it from my generic resource or trying to appeal a denial. It's really important that you know that. So that's what I want you to take away from this page 22. Next slide. Another thing that we need to always consider when we're asking for services is that the regional center has the obligation to provide the least costly service that will meet your needs, right? So if your needs could be satisfied by driving, I'm just using this as an example, a Ford, and you ask the regional center for a Tesla, what are those? Those are to provide transportation, right? The regional center is going to say, well, no, your needs can be provided through a Ford, not a Tesla. Not that I'm saying that the regional centers will provide for cars, but it's that kind of example, right? But the law also says, and that's important to know too, that the consumer shall not be required to use the least costly provider if it will result in the consumer moving from an existing provider of services or supports to more restrictive or less integrated services or supports. So if the regional center's wanting to move you to another provider, well, you have to ask yourself, well, wait a minute, is that going to be more restrictive for me, less integrated for me? And remind the regional center, and it's right here, the law is WIC 4648A6D. So least costly alternative, yes, but it has to meet your needs, right? And there's this note to know about. Next slide. Natural supports. Sometimes the regional center will say to you, oh, but you have natural supports. We're not going to give you that service because you have natural supports. What are natural supports? People who are in your life, family, friends, who are able to help you meet your needs for free. If you're an adult, the regional center can't say you have natural supports. You can't force your family and friends to provide the service for free. Natural supports are really, really for minors, right? And there's an expectation that families will use the same resources they would use for a non-disabled child to support their child with disability. There's the code section. So let me give you a really good example of this. Daycare. You're the parent, you need to go to work, and you need to put your child with a disability in daycare. And you go to the regional center and you say, I need you to pay for daycare because I need to work and my child with a disability, your consumer needs daycare. The regional center will say, fine, but we're only going to pay So let me get backtrack. Let's say that because of your child's disability, you would pay an extra, you're going to be charged an extra $50 a week to have that child in daycare. So the regional center will say to the parent, okay, you're responsible for paying for daycare for the daycare. We're responsible for paying for that extra $50 because of your child's disability. The daycare is charging more. You can't expect the regional center to pay for all of the daycare, but to pay for that extra charge because your child has a disability, right? That's a really good example of this. So if you have a child, a minor child, and you're with a service coordinator and you're talking about services, yes, the service coordinator will start to explore natural supports for the child. So next slide. Okay. You have services that are in your IPP. Remember, your IPP is a contract between the consumer and the regional center, and what is in the IPP has to be provided by the regional center. It's no excuse for the regional center to say that that we can't provide the service because there are no vendors. That's not an excuse, because there are options for the regional center. They can look for other vendors. They can send out requests for proposals. You can use other vendors from other regional centers. You can approach, or the regional center can approach, vendors who provide similar services and see if that vendor is willing to provide the service in the IPP. The regional can even ask DDS for funds to develop a new program of services and supports. So when the regional center says, oh, sorry, there are no vendors, well, you say, sorry, but you have the obligation to provide the services that are in the IPP. So what are you going to do about it, right? If you ever have any problems, call us, or call, support for families. This shouldn't be happening for people. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about IPPs, individual program plans. Next slide. Like I said, it's a contract between the consumer and the regional center. It's going to list all the services and supports. It has to be held every 3 years, but it's held really every year. And as a consumer of the regional center, you can request an IPP at any time. And once you request an IPP, it has to be held. The meeting with the IPP team has to be held within 30 days of your request. And the IPP has to be person-centered to the consumer, right? So that's really important. But, it's a contract. So what's in there has to be provided. Next slide. Parts of the IPP, you're going to see sections on goals and objectives, schedule of types and amounts of services and supports. When you're talking about, how much in service and supports, be as specific as possible. That they're going to give me a personal, rather than saying in the IPP, for example, yeah, I'm going to get 30 hours of personal assistance. Be more specific than that. How many times per week? How many hours per week? It's good to be specific about the services and supports that you want. The IPP will also have a review of health status and a schedule for review and evaluation of the IPP. And this code section talks more about the parts of the IPP. Slide. Who should be at the IPP meeting? The consumer, a parent or guardian, conservator, regional center people, the service coordinator, others that may be appropriate at the IPP. Next slide. Simple. If the service or support is not in the IPP, the regional center does not have to give it to you. If it's in the IPP, the regional center has to give it to you. That's simple. Next slide. Things to remember before you have that IPP meeting. You can notify the regional center in writing that you want to record the IPP meeting. Yes, you have a right to record the IPP meeting. You must give at least 24 hours notice. Now, if the regional center wants to record the IPP, you can object and it will not be recorded. I had heard recently, we had someone call our intake line, and the caller was telling us that the regional center told them that they didn't have to record the IPP. They wouldn't allow the IPP meeting to be recorded. The law hasn't changed. So we gave that person this code section to go back to the regional center and say, hey, you're wrong about that. Sometimes when the regional center says something to you and it just doesn't sound right, or they're denying something, ask them, what's your authority for that? So for example, for this client, if I would have been the parent, I would have said, and the regional center says to me, oh no, we don't have to we're not, we don't have to record. You're requesting that the IPP meeting be recorded. We don't have to allow that. I would say, well, as far as I know, the law says that you have to. So where is the authority for the fact that you no longer have to? And see if you ever get anything, right? It's really good to bring someone to the IPP meeting who could be a note taker. If you're going to have an interpreter, you have the right to an interpreter. Bring someone who knows both languages, because there are nightmares with regard to interpreters at these meetings, not only at meetings, at hearings. I've had really bad experience with interpreters at hearings, meetings. So it's really important to have someone there who knows both languages and can interject if the interpreter is not doing the correct interpretation, to say, wait a minute, that's not what the consumer said or the parent said. The consumer said this and the interpreter said something different, because words make a difference when you're interpreting. And before the IPP meeting, you should be making sure that there's going to be a decision maker at the IPP, someone who represents the regional center who can make decisions there and then, because you have the right to have a decision maker at the IPP. And if you get to the IPP and you realize that there's no decision maker, you can continue the IPP meeting, and it has to be scheduled within 15 days. Of that first meeting, unless you extend the deadline. And it's all in the law. We're not making this up. See, that's why it's important for you, because this is going to be a lifetime thing. You need to understand what the law says, right? Because the law is the law. You might be told things that are not the law. And that's why you need to know what the law says, the deadlines for things. Next slide. Native language rights, we're going to go through this briefly. Native language is the language that the consumer or client normally prefers. The regional center must provide information in a manner that is culturally and linguistically appropriate. The law says that. Next slide. What are threshold languages? So if you live in a county where where at least 5% of the population in your county speaks your language, that is a threshold language. So for example, in Los Angeles County, more than 5% of the population in Los Angeles County speaks Spanish. So Spanish would be a threshold language in Los Angeles County, right? If your language is a threshold language, the regional center has 45 days to provide a translated copy of your IPP. If your language is not considered a threshold language, the regional center can take longer than that. And the regional center has to keep track of the number of times it takes more than 60 days to provide a translated IPP. One thing that I want you to know is that there is no obligation for you to sign the IPP at the IPP meeting, at the end of the IPP meeting. I hear time and time again, parents, feeling pressure at the IPP meeting to sign that IPP meeting. You should take that IPP home, review it, make sure that everything is factually correct, make sure that everything that was agreed upon is there before you sign the IPP. Now, if you need an IPP, for example, in Spanish, take the English version with you home, have someone who knows both languages review it with you, because remember, if you don't sign the IPP, the services won't start, right? And you can agree to some of the things in the IPP, you can disagree to some of the things in the IPP, but especially if you have to wait for a translated version, meet with someone who you trust to go over it with you, to translate it into your language. Next slide. What needs to be in your native language? Your initial intake meeting when you want to become a regional center client, assessments, IPP meetings, IPP documents, supports and services. Next slide. Yeah, so in your IPP, it should say if you've asked for the things be in your native language, it should state it in the IPP. If the regional center is not providing you these documents in your native language, you can always file what is called the 4731 complaint. And you file that 4731 complaint with the executive director of the regional center. The executive director will have a limited time to respond to your complaint, and you'll receive a letter from the executive director. And if you're not happy with the response from the executive director, then you can file a complaint directly with the Department of Developmental Services. In our Rights Under the Lanterman Act manual, there's a whole chapter on all of this, and I'll talk about it briefly. Next slide. 4731 complaints. So I've provided you a link to the DDS website that talks about complaints. When the regional center is not following the law, maybe not providing you with services in your IPP, you can file a 4731 complaint. Appeals are different. Appeals are when you've been denied eligibility for regional center, or once you're a regional center client, you've been denied a service you requested, a service has been reduced, a service has been terminated. Your eligibility for regional center services is terminated. Yes, that happens, but we've seen cases where persons have been regional center clients for years, and suddenly the regional center is saying, hey, we should never have found you eligible to be a regional center 20 years ago. Well, it doesn't mean that the regional center is correct in what it's doing, but there is termination of regional center eligibility. And if that ever happens to you, you need to reach out to us, because the law is very specific under what circumstances that can happen. You have also, there have been since last year some very fundamental changes in the appeals process with regard to regional center. hearings, positive changes. You have more time to appeal. If you appeal within 30 days of your notice, you automatically get a paid pending. Your service will not terminate until there's a hearing decision. And if you win the hearing decision, then you'll continue with your services. So and we've updated our rights under the Lanham Act manual with all of the changes in the appeals process. Judges are supposed to be more neutral, help people at the hearing get the facts. So there's a lot of good stuff that you should look at in our manual. And we've also included information on the appeals process, the changes that have happened, that information is available on the DDS website. Slide. Self-determination is something that's available to consumers at the regional center. It gives them more control and responsibility in choosing services and supports. It's a relatively new thing. It's been around. There was a pilot program, and then it became available to everyone in the regional center. I've given you links to information on self-determination. Disability Voices United has a lot of really good information on self-determination. They just finished a training on self-determination that happened in November. State Council on Developmental Disabilities. So if you're interested in self-determination, open these links, talk to the service coordinator. There are things that need to happen. And so that's self-determination. It's much more than what I've said, but if you're interested in a different way to get your services and supports where you have more control, where you're given you come to an agreement on a budget and you get to use the money in your budget the way you want to use it. There are, of course, limitations, but you have a lot more control. Some of you may even be on the self-determination program or know of consumers in self-determination. There's our website there, our link to our manual. And something that's really important is that if you're having trouble with the regional center, no matter what it is, there's an Office of the Ombudsman. You need to contact them and say, for example, this could be a good example. I requested a service. I requested respite services from my service coordinator 9 months ago. And I continue to be told by the service coordinator that they're thinking about it. They're waiting for a response. That is absolutely ridiculous time to wait for a response. That I would contact the Office of the Ombudsman and say, this is what's happening. And they may be able to assist you. Some of that assistance can also include the Office of the Ombudsman calling the regional center and saying, hey, what's up? What's going on here, right? There's also an Office of the Ombudsman if you're having issues, if you're in the self-determination program and you're having problems. So for example, getting getting vendors paid through the FMS, the entity that handles the monies, the budget. That may be a topic to reach out to the Office of the Ombudsman. So these resources are here, use them. The more the Office of the Ombudsman, whether for self-determination or any other issue with regard to regional center, is housed within the Department of Developmental Services. The more they hear about problems that are happening at the regional centers, the more they have an idea of the problems, right? And maybe they can address those problems on a more systemic basis. Next slide. So we've come to the end of the presentation. I've given you a lot of information, basics, right? Because if I were to talk to you about regional center system, I could talk for a week about it. So I've given you just some very basic information. If you have any issues with regard to your regional center, doubts, you can contact us, and you have our intake line there. Or you can contact your Office of Client Rights Advocate, our sister organization. Sometimes people are confused between DRC and OCRA. We're sister organizations. We can help consumers of the regional center. DRC can help consumer of the regional centers, or people who want to be consumers of the regional centers. But we also help other people with other disabilities. So we can help people with mental disabilities, physical disabilities, traumatic brain injury. Our Office of Client Rights Advocates, they can only help clients of the regional center, or people who want to become clients of the regional center. Their population is smaller than what DRC can, than DRC's population. And the Office of Client Rights can help help consumers not only with regional center issues, but they can also help you with other issues, IHSS, special education. They're not limited to just regional center services. So I hope I've given you a better idea of OCRA and DRC. The units within DRC, like our IDD unit, Intellectual Developmental Disabilities unit, they do a lot of policy work. They focus on a lot of systemic work. They also do individual case work, but they do focus on a lot of different things, because there are different ways to solve things with systems. So we're going to go ahead and see if there are any questions or comments.